Hello, hello. We are live and we are welcoming you to the Smart Elections Election Protection Forum. I am Lulu Friesdat. I'm the executive director of Smart Elections. I am a quite pale Caucasian woman or white, extremely white, having not been out in the sun very much lately. I have brown hair and wearing a tiger eye necklace and a brown sweater with a brick wall behind me. We give these visual descriptions so that any of our audience members who potentially do not, who have visual impairment, can feel welcome and have a sense of what's going on. And my colleague here.
I am Shelby County Election Commissioner Bennie Smith, and technical advisor for Smart Elections, and I am a black male, short hair, and cleanly shaved face with, and I'm wearing a brown vest with green sleeves.
And we have ASL interpreters this evening. First with us is Emilio Hernandez. Emilio, do you want to give a visual description?
Hello, I'm a tan Mexican male, bald, with a black dress shirt and a white background.
And I'm not sure if Alana's prepared, but if she is, I'll pop her on so that we can get her. Hi, Alana. Thank you so much for being with us. Sorry to surprise you there. This is Alana Pilardi, who is also an ASL interpreter. Would you like to give a visual description?
Oh, she's muted. You're muted, Alana.
Oh no, there we go. I'm a Caucasian female. I've got short brown hair and glasses. I have a dark blue long sleeve shirt and a white background.
And Alana's audio was breaking up a little bit there for those who may have had trouble hearing her. She's a friendly woman with wonderful energy and a blue sweater, dark brown hair, white with big glasses. So we're going to, okay, super. We're going to pop back to just one interpreter for the rest of the forum. And we want to give you just a little bit of information about us. We are Smart Elections. Our mission is elevating election reform to an urgent national priority, which we firmly believe it needs to be. We focus on election security because that is our area of expertise. I am an election security journalist, and Bennie is a software developer. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background, Bennie?
Yeah, I've been writing code for about 20 years for a lot of the corporations, some Fortune 50 companies. So I got a lot of skin in the game when it comes to writing code, and I'm pretty familiar with elections too.
So we definitely have concerns about election security, but we are also interested in fair elections, and the adjectives that we use in terms of describing our work. We are interested in elections that are secure, fair, accessible, well administered, and publicly verifiable. And there are many organizations and individuals, advocates working across the political spectrum for those same goals. And one of our main purposes is to work in collaboration with them and to try to build bridges and foster dialogue. So what you're going to hear this evening are political perspectives that are quite different from each other. But one of the main things that they have in common is that they believe that the election laws are being slanted and developed and changed to favor one party or the other. And what's really important for us tonight is to really try to keep an open mind and to really listen and find what we believe is evidence that we can rely on to make informed decisions. Because one of the things that we know is that all of us have cognitive biases and we all live in bubbles to a certain extent. Many of us listen to just one media outlet or another, or media outlets that tend to reinforce each other. And I will say to you that if you are listening to the New York Times podcasts, PBS, and watching MSNBC, there is definitely information that you are not getting. And if you are only listening to the Fox News channel and Rush Limbaugh, there's another set of information that you are not getting. So what we're trying to do here is give you a wide spectrum of information that you can really sort through and try to do your own research on, check facts, and come to what you to a position that you feel you're comfortable with. But it's very important for us to have dialogue. One of the things that is happening in our culture right now is that there is very little cross-partisan dialogue. And so what we really encourage you to do tonight and at all of our events is listen, something that we call deep listening. Really try to open your mind and just see where it takes you. Free your mind. Anything you wanted to add in there, Benny?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, awesome. We are going to rock on then. So our first guest that we are delighted to have with us is from the Center for Common Ground. Her name is Jody Ritterer, and here she comes. And we are going to go into a format that allows us to focus on her a little bit more fully. And we're going to lose some of our branding because you know by now that we are Smart Elections. And I might be able to yes. Okay. We got our ASL
Mhm.
reporter up top. Nice. Okay.
Josie in the hot seat.
Josie, have
Hi,
I?
everyone.
Hey,
Go
say
ahead.
hello.
Yeah,
Say
hi, everyone. My name is Josie Riederer. I am a white Caucasian female. I have short brown hair with bangs and glasses. I'm wearing a blue turtleneck sweater and have a window behind me with some plants and grapefruits. I'm very happy to be here tonight.
Nicely done. So, why don't you just start out by giving us a little bit of background in terms of you work for the Center for Common Ground? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work in that organization?
Correct. Yeah. I am the Deputy Policy Director at the Center for Common Ground. We are actually a nonpartisan voting rights organization. We primarily work in the South in communities of color to engage them around various issues and empower them in their right to vote and participate in elections, make their voices heard. My job specifically is working with local on the ground partners to kind of understand and create legislative priorities around what we see as voter expansive legislation. So, bills that will make voting easier and not more difficult for communities in the states that we work in.
And you're also very concerned about some of the laws that have been moving forward that you feel have been restricting voter rights.
Absolutely. Some of the states I'll be talking about today, Texas and Georgia specifically, also Arizona and Virginia. These are all places that I worked in last year, and some of the bills that passed we fought really, really hard against because they create a lot of new challenges for voters. And I'll talk about kind of what some of those challenges look like specifically in Texas.
So let's just start with a broad view. One of the articles that came out was from the Brennan Center, and the Brennan Center found that more than 440 bills with provisions that restrict voting access were introduced in 49 states in the 2021 legislative session. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that? It's a lot
Yeah.
of bills in a lot of states that they were concerned about.
Yes, it's a lot of bills. I know over 150 of them, I think, are actually also carried over now into this session. These bills all have similar themes. For example, they attack absentee voting in different ways, have new voter ID requirements. They might attempt to ban or limit drop boxes in states that had them. Um, there were attempts to also outlaw weekend voting in Texas and Georgia, for example, that was not successful. There are a lot of efforts also to criminalize election workers and voters, so that creates a lot of fear for people. And also, a lot of these bills would give state legislators a lot more control over elections.
So when you
And
say
so
criminalize election workers, that sounds really scary. What does that mean?
yeah, it is kind of scary. Texas is a great example. So SB1 is this big omnibus election bill that passed in last session. It does a lot of things, but among them, for example, makes it a felony for election officials to distribute mail ballot applications unless a voter specifically requests one. It also threatens
I'm
poll
sorry, I'm going to
workers.
interrupt you just for a minute and just try to get you to expand on that a little bit. So just
Yeah.
kind of like tease that out for us. What does that mean exactly? And what is the intent there? What are they trying to prevent?
Yeah, so previously it would be possible for election officials to send an absentee ballot application to an eligible voter's home. So in Texas, that means you're over 65, you have a disability, some other medical exemption, or you're in the military overseas. Now that is not possible, but if an election official were to send absentee ballot applications to your home and you did not officially request to get one, that could get them in trouble with the law.
Well, why would they send someone an application if it wasn't requested? What would sort of what would induce them to do that?
Yeah, I think it just adds a lot less time on both ends, because especially in Texas, to request an absentee ballot application, you have to sign it by hand on paper. This way, Georgia used to do this as well for eligible voters that already generally will vote by mail. They were already getting the absentee ballot applications. Now they have to request one and fill it out and then get the absentee ballot and return it all in a certain time period. So it just adds a lot of extra steps for also election workers that weren't there before.
So what this is basically doing is making it so that voters who on a regular basis know that they're going to need an absentee ballot have to go to the trouble of requesting it every single election.
Correct. And that could be fine if that's like something that you're used to, but that's not something you know, and you do not know that these new election regulations have been implemented in your state. That can create a lot of confusion and frustration.
All right, so you gotta walk me like a 3-year-old. This is the
Yeah.
This is the application that's being sent, not the ballot.
Correct. That's how it's a mail absentee mail absentee ballot application.
Okay, so that's like that in Tennessee already.
Mhm.
And if I understand you correctly, it is illegal for an election worker to say, let me just go ahead and send you an application to request a ballot. Not let me send you a ballot because
Correct.
I think you want to vote.
Correct. It's
So it's like
illegal
a
for you to
four-way
send.
deal. You ask me, then I mail you, then you send back the filled out application, then I mail you a ballot, then you send me the mailed in ballot. So that's like that's four stamps.
That's how I understand it. I'm not a lawyer, but that's how I read.
No,
That's
that's
how
how
I've
it worked in
understood the
Tennessee.
law too. Yeah, and I think that the biggest problem here is not even that it just adds more steps, is that it gives someone risks a felony conviction for doing that.
Yeah,
Which
it's
is
like that in Tennessee.
yeah,
It's
that's
a
yeah,
little draconian.
problematic. Yeah.
Because now it doesn't take into the account that the internet exists, right? Like everybody can go to the Secretary of State site and basically, and this happened to us in 2020, where I was doing these press conferences with individuals who were saying, "Well, I'm just going to forward them the link. I'm going to forward the link to my grandmama, or we're going to come to the church and we're going to download it." And I was like, "Nope, that's actually illegal. You can't do that." And it doesn't make any sense at all. Nonetheless, this is so they just passed the bill like that for you guys.
In Texas, yeah. Yeah,
rough.
I'm not in that state. Yeah, Georgia as well. Georgia's made that illegal as well.
Yeah,
So
that's
both of these states, yeah.
So it's basically just kind of making it harder and harder and harder for people who want to vote by mail to participate in that process.
It really constrains the process. You now have to ask the election commission to send you a request so that you can ask to vote. Like I gotta ask you to let me ask you to vote instead of just having the opportunity somewhere to get it and then requesting it. You still have to request it, but you have to request that you want to request it. If that makes any sense.
And as Carol said in the chat, not everybody has internet access. So if you do have the internet, you can at least print your application at home, sign it, and then send it to the office where they can then send you your ballot. But again, these are just a lot of challenges. So to me, that's something as an organization that believes in making voting as easy and accessible as possible. This is something that we find pretty problematic in Texas and in Georgia now as new provisions in the election law.
And do you want to talk about some of the, so that's Texas, seems like we're getting a lot of restrictions there. And then do you want to talk, and then the other thing that happened in Texas that was really pretty shocking was that they created a situation where they changed how people had to fill in the absentee ballots. I think now you have to fill in your driver's license number, and then those driver's license numbers like weren't actually matching the right format. Some of them were older, and there wound up being a lot of ballots rejected.
Yeah, it's actually, so that's happening like right now, the last 2 weeks. People are starting to vote by mail for the upcoming primary election on March 1st. And it's even, I guess, more complicated than that. So not only do you now have to fill out your driver's license or the last four digits of your social security number to vote for your absentee ballot to be accepted, it has to be the exact same number you used when you registered to vote. So if you're 65 or older and you started voting at 18 in Texas, you're not going to remember necessarily what that number is. And so that's why you're seeing
you ain't got
like
that.
up to 50% of ballots being rejected in Texas. And on top of that, there's technically supposed to be, well, there is a portal, if you have internet and you know how to use it, where you can fix your ballot, but it's not, we were on a call yesterday with an election official in Texas. That's not really working, and not everybody's still finding out that their ballots are being rejected. So this is something that these are eligible voters whose votes are not being counted, and they might not even know about it. This is, to me, one of the biggest problems, and I think that one thing they can really see as an impact of SB1, the law that passed in 2021 in Texas, and how that's really going to negatively affect the elections this year.
Wow.
Yeah, and by the time they find out, there's no way to cure it. I mean, the election's over. It's really going to stack a bunch of ballots up with no. I'm sure the legislature is saying that if you find that there's a problem, you got time to correct it. But I mean, election's over.
Yeah, and now it's been messy. Can they be denied after the initial request? Yes, they can. And yeah, so, and with the Omicron variant out, you really want people to be able to feel like they're safe voting by mail, and now that's not really, you don't know if your vote's gonna count as much anymore, and that's very difficult for a lot of people. Yeah.
So let's just get that question clearly, because I think that was a little bit confusing. Someone in the chat, that's Laura Foreman, said, can they be denied after the initial request? And what does that mean?
The way, Laura, if I'm understanding you correctly, let me know if I'm not. I'm assuming that means after you request your absentee ballot and you you finally get your actual ballot and you fill it out with the information that you think is correct or you thought you're supposed to give, and you return it, it can be rejected after that. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking. They should get a chance to fix it, but that's been not very clear or straightforward since this law has been implemented. So
it just sounds like a lot of confusion, and that perhaps that law was not really thought out, or maybe, they needed to do a pilot test,
in Tennessee.
In one county. So sounds like a lot of confusion there, whether that's intended or not. I know there's always, questions of intent. Is the intent of the law to really, is the law intended to make sure that only eligible voters vote, or is there an additional intent to actually prevent people from voting who are perhaps going to not vote for your party? And I think something that is always a concern.
Yeah, absolutely.
Per Laura, you aced it. She said that's what she meant.
Okay.
Awesome, Laura.
So let's keep moving here. I know you wanted to talk to us about Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia, again, a lot of these laws, or Georgia and Texas they're pretty similar. They're massive omnibus bills. What I mean by that, SB 202 is a 98-page bill. It's huge, it's massive. And a lot of the things that it does is pretty similar in some ways to Texas. So it criminalizes voters and election workers. Something that I think is pretty outrageous is that it allows anybody, your name, Bob from down the street, can choose to challenge your voter registration, and everybody in your town or everybody in the state, and if potentially risk costing your right to vote because they just think that you're not eligible to vote. They have a right to do that. They also, an individual can challenge an unlimited number of registered voters, and if they have the right to vote in an upcoming election. Something that we've all definitely heard of is that it's now a crime for volunteers to hand out food and water to voters waiting in line, as well as for the voters to accept this food or water. You can be charged with a misdemeanor for doing that. And it also creates a new felony. I'm listing a lot of laws, so please let me know if I'm going too fast or I don't want to take up too much time, but it creates a new felony for anybody that witnesses somebody else signing their absentee ballot at home that wasn't supposed to be there.
Find that out.
It's just, messy.
What
How would they find that out? I know, I wonder that too. But
what does it even mean? I don't understand that.
The whistleblower that thing there going on.
So there's certain, in Texas and Georgia now, you have to be basically authorized to assist somebody in signing their absentee ballot. If you weren't legally authorized to do that, you can be charged with a felony. Yeah, it is hard to catch that. I don't know how they would follow up on that, but the fact that that is something, again, that you can risk criminal prosecution for to different extents.
So I'm gonna come their way a little bit. Lulu, we had this conversation all the time. The privacy of the ballot, the secrecy of the ballot. And a lot of people say, well, if you allow people to vote with a paper ballot or if you get a receipt, you can then pay for votes. And my response is always, well, if you're sitting at home, I already know how you voted. I can fill it out myself. And it seems like this is a reach, probably too far, but a reach to say that if someone had their ballot filled out that they were uncomfortable with or deemed was a problem for them, then they would have redress for it. That's what it sounds like. I think that's a big reach, right? It's basically you can't say that I got to pay for a vote now because it's a crime for you to do it without my permission. That's what it sounds like. I had to put my election commission hat on. It does sound like that's what they're reaching for. It's more like a whistleblower type thing. I don't know how in God's name that'd be somebody's word against somebody else's.
Yeah, I think it's really for fear purposes, right? And making people a little more unsure about if how they're voting is right and if they should even vote. That's how I kind of interpret it.
I'm gonna order your ballot and I'm gonna fill it out for you. Like you don't have you don't have a vote.
So if that circumstance existed and someone was being coerced, then they have some sort of redress to punish that coercion. But it's hard to imagine like somebody who's actually being coerced to have, the ability to press those charges anyway. They're probably being coerced to the point where they couldn't press those charges. So it seems more like a provision that's intended for intimidation.
Yeah, we're gonna go in your house and try to determine
intimidate voters, right? So we do just have like a minute or two left because we have to get to some other perspectives. But I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about. Let's go to Virginia because you said there was a lot of. Now these laws that we've talked about actually passed. These are actual laws in Texas and Georgia now. But now in Virginia, it was kind of a different format. You told me that there were proposals, but they really did not have the same success getting them passed.
Well, these are all for this legislative session. I should clarify. So in Virginia last year, we actually passed tons, like a huge amount of really voter expansive bills that are all now, for the most part, being challenged. For example, 45 days of early voting became legal last legislative session. Having more drop boxes, lessening voter ID requirements, these kinds of things now are all are being challenged basically to be overturned. And I counted about 60 laws. Some of them are exact replicas of each other that are, again, trying to ban drop boxes, ban or end no excuse absentee voting, get rid of the permanent absentee voter list. Oh gosh, what are some other things? Shorten early voting from 45 to 8 days, get rid of same-day voter registration. So there's a lot of these bills that we've seen in other states like Texas and Georgia that maybe got that did pass or were proposed, will maybe be proposed again this year. But one, I guess, silver lining in a voting rights world that's very, very much not bipartisan, we do have one great bipartisan bill that will hopefully pass this year in Virginia. That is the constitutional amendment to restore the right to vote to former felons. Virginia is still one of 2 states that permanently takes away former felons' right to vote unless the governor chooses to restore that right. This is from a 1902 resolution that was totally, very obviously based on for racist reasons. And it passed last year for the first time, but because it's a constitutional amendment, it needs to pass again. And we have bipartisan support. We did last year, we do again this year, even have a Republican legislator carrying one of the versions of this bill on the House floor. So this is something that is exciting and I think great to look forward to in a world that feels kind of a very dark voting rights world at the moment.
Wow. So yeah, it can happen. We can have some bipartisan cooperation sometimes. That's nice to see that. So I think that's all that we have time for, but I think that was tremendously informative. And if people want to get in touch with you to find out more information, how would you suggest they reach out to you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me at Josie, so JOSI, at centerforcommonground.org. You can also find my email on our website. And one thing I'll say before I go, because there isn't any more time, but there's a great resource. It's called the Voting Rights Lab. If you are really interested in knowing kind of what kinds of laws are being introduced and proposed in the states, it's a free tracker, and they have a weekly newsletter called The Markup that anybody can subscribe to. And it'll just give you kind of a weekly update on what good and bad laws are moving through the states. So that is just something that might be interesting for you all.
Super. And did I get your email?
There you go. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, super. So if people want to be in touch with Josie, that's the way to do it. And you can go ahead and just throw that link into the private chat for the Voting Rights Lab, and we'll try to make sure that that gets into the chat for people if they want to access that. That's a great resource. So thank you so much for being with us. It's really, really interesting to just kind of hear about the mix of, forces that are at play, sort of push and pull on election laws.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Super.
Thank you, Josie.
Okay, so next up, we are going to listen to an interview that I did with Carl Romanelli. He was a Green Party candidate in 2006, I believe, for the Senate, and he had a really challenging experience with that. And we're going to see a clip from a documentary that I did about him, and then the interview that I did with him about how different ways in which the Democrats and the Republicans will both try to really make sure that independent parties are not able to participate. So this is first a clip from the documentary that I made, and then an interview with Carl Romanelli.
People have been registering more as independent.
1/3 of all registered voters in this country are not members of the Republican or the Democratic Party.
But the fact is that in a lot of races, they don't have candidates.
Historically, in Pennsylvania, there have been a lot of third parties. In fact, up until the early 20th century, you would typically see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 candidates on the statewide ballot.
Throughout our history, it was only these little parties that got the ball rolling. The anti-slavery party, the women's right to vote party in the 19th century, Labor, Farm Party.
Having lots of candidates on the ballot had another advantage: high voter turnout.
Turnout levels are around 80%. in the late 19th century. That is considered something of the high water mark in American political participation.
But then they started putting in their laws. They were originally designed to protect us from the communists in the 30s.
Various states passed laws making it increasingly difficult for third parties to get on the ballot.
So you'll see that starting around 1920, 1930, there are no third-party candidates running for statewide office in Pennsylvania.
Give me an example of an issue that you brought to the campaign that neither of the major parties was discussing.
Single-payer health care.
Can you give me a brief description of what happened to Carl Romanelli?
A brief description, you're like, 2 words, got screwed.
In order to qualify for the ballot after my party nominated me, I needed to gather at least 67,072 voter signatures.
They have this arcane formula that you have to get 2% of the highest vote getter in the prior statewide election. That's how many signatures you need.
The Democrats' minimum number of signatures is 2,000.
Bob Casey, when he ran for U.S. Senate, he only needed 2,000 signatures.
Because he's a Democrat.
Yes.
And who makes those rules?
Republicans and Democrats.
How many signatures did you get?
99,802. The Democrats filed a challenge.
It's terrible what they did to Carl.
My name was not allowed to appear on the ballot.
It's chilling.
It hurt to have election day come and go and not even have that choice on the ballot.
All we're looking for is an even break.
We should all play by the same rules.
They're on the ballot, I'm on the ballot, we're all in the debates.
Do you think that third-party candidates bring new voters into the process?
Absolutely. There are so few people who participate now. If you really want more participation, you need people to feel their ideas are being represented.
I want everyone to meet Carl Romanelli, who has done a tremendous amount of work in the independent party space. So we're really delighted to have you here with us. We just watched the clip of all that you went through in terms of trying to be a candidate for the Senate. And I want to just ask you first, why is it important for third parties to be on the ballot and to compete? Many people say, like, I don't know why I would vote for a third party candidate. I'm throwing away my vote. What do you have to say to that?
Well, third parties and our party in particular wants to raise the level of discourse in politics. We'd like to be more issue oriented as opposed to this pathology that's really accelerated in recent years between red and blue, where it's almost as mindless as, say, cheering for the Yankees or the Red Sox, when politics should be a science of ideas and policy. And sadly, year after year, besides some smaller tweaks, we really don't have changes in policy. The policy seems to be the same. So I think we need a more elevated level of discussion on the issues of our time, as well as a more inclusive discussion on those issues. We think the issues the Greens stand for resonate with many Americans, and we would like that to be part of the debate and put a challenge out to the old parties that if our ideas are so radical and out of step, then please debate us publicly and reveal that.
So there are many ways that the main parties, techniques that the main parties use to keep independent parties from being part of the conversation. And what are some of those techniques?
Well, again, onerous ballot requirements in many states, as I've experienced here in Pennsylvania. Also, even once we qualify for ballots, then we are often excluded from being part of the debate, whether the rules are set by a debate sponsor like the media, or even if civic organizations are bullied into keeping us out because old party candidates say they won't participate if Greens or Libertarians or the People's Party should somehow be included in those debates.
Jill Stein actually got arrested trying to enter one of the debates. Is that correct?
Yes, trying to enter the debate venue itself, where she was already excluded from participating. And yeah, she was detained and handcuffed to a chair for hours.
Oh my God.
During
No,
her...
she was a candidate for president at the time, a legitimate candidate.
Yes, and you know, an aging woman, you know, not that any physique would make it justifiable, but you know, this little tiny older woman, a physician, a candidate for president of the United States, is handcuffed to a chair for hours for attempting to enter a debate venue.
Wow. And the Green Party actually had a big success in terms of improving the verification of our elections. Do you want to talk about that?
We settled with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, with Pennsylvania guaranteeing paper ballots throughout the state, when at the time almost 2/3 of the state had no paper whatsoever.
Right. You were voting on what's called direct record electronic machines, where the voter's vote is recorded directly on the computer's memory, and so can be changed or deleted, or mistakes can be made, that there's actually no trace of the voter's vote in that situation. And up until the 2020 presidential election, that is how most of Pennsylvania was voting.
Correct.
So the Green Party has really been on the front edge of election security and accuracy and fighting transparency, fighting those battles, sometimes really out there on your own. And historically, it is independent parties that have also been on the front of trying to end slavery, trying to get women the right to vote. Many of these huge battles have initially been fought by independent parties, correct?
Absolutely. And in today's global and domestic climate, we think a lot of Green Party ideas deserve to be part of the debate. And in many ways, they could augment some of the policy that other parties say they support, like single payer healthcare, for example.
Right.
Which
just in terms of bringing ideas to the debate and fostering a discussion of these ideas. If the Green Party was included in the debates and had more access to media, things like that, we would have a greater discussion of these ideas.
Agreed. Yes.
Super. And then let's just talk about a few techniques that have been used to try to really prevent the Greens from competing in elections. So for example, there was specifically a provision in the HR 1, the For the People Act, and that was really targeted at eliminating the Green Party or making it much harder to compete. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes, any party can apply for public funding through matching funds. And the criteria that the Greens had taken advantage of in a number of national elections was raising at least $5,000 in small contributions across 20 states. and that would qualify our candidates for federal matching funds, funds that were very important in helping us, in our case, qualify for ballots across the country. In the For the People Act, that provision of law was changed where the criteria was increased to $25,000 per state across 20 states. So essentially increasing it 5 times higher than what currently exists. And I'll add that the Greens are one of the parties that consistently tries to take advantage of these matching funds because what contributions we do get are in small amounts, and B, our party does not take PAC contributions. Our candidates don't. So
this is something that would specifically have targeted the Green Party. And even you said the Libertarian Party was not really raising and taking advantage of matching funds. It really seemed very targeted at the Green Party.
Yes, because libertarians can often raise money that's better than what matching funds could offer.
So that was an interview that I did with Carl Romanelli earlier today. He was not able to be with us tonight live, but I hope that you found that really interesting. As we have a comment in the chat, I see Mr.
I got a
Romanelli
comment.
as a hero. Thank you for all you have done and are doing. That's to Carl. Benny?
I got a comment. I was like, Lulu doesn't age a bit. I didn't realize the interview was from earlier.
That interview was from earlier today, but I made that film in 2008. But thank you, Benny.
Okay.
So we're gonna have an interview now with a guest, Maureen Reardon, and I'm happy to bring her on. And Maureen, I would love to have you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about some of your work. We're really, really lucky to have you with us. Maureen is a very experienced attorney, and she's going to talk to us about some of her views.
Unmute yourself, Maureen.
No, we got to get you unmuted.
You're still muted.
See if you can, there's like 3 little dots in your box. I'm not allowed to unmute you.
It should be down at the bottom. You can press Control D and it'll unmute yourself.
There.
Bam.
She got that.
All right. Sorry about that. I don't know how I got muted, but I must have hit something.
Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. So my name is Maureen Reardon. I have been an attorney for over 30 years, and for up until the year from 2000 until 2020, I worked as an attorney in the voting section of the Civil Rights Division at DOJ. My responsibilities there were to enforce several different aspects of the Voting Rights Act on the 15th Amendment and the parts of the 14th Amendment. And I was there from 2000, right before the presidential election, between Mr. Bush and Mr. Gore. So I was there to see all of that. And then after my 20 years, I decided to continue in the same line of work, and I now work for the Public Interest Legal Foundation. And we are a nonprofit that is dedicated to election integrity as well as preserving the rights of the states to conduct their own elections.
Super. Well, thank you so much for being here. So I was wondering if I have your testimony that you gave to the Senate in regard to HR 4, and I thought it might be interesting for people just to see that testimony because you had a lot of experience there at the Department of Justice. And I think it's helpful for people to see that you had some very strong feelings about what happened there. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is Maureen's testimony at the at the Senate in regard to H.R. 4, which was a piece of federal legislation called the Voting Rights Act.
If passed, H.R. 4 will give tremendous power over the election procedures of every state and local election to the partisan bureaucrats in the voting section. I watched this power abused firsthand, and I would like to share with you a few of the experiences I had while working there. I began my employment in 2000, right prior to the 2000 election. And when the Florida recount occurred, I personally observed attorneys within the section strategizing, faxing, and receiving faxes from DNC operatives in Florida. Such partisan beliefs permeate every aspect of the section's work. I also witnessed twisted racialism when George Bush appointed Ralph Boyd, an African American, to head the Civil Rights Division. I often heard from attorneys that, well, he's not really Black, and that no self-respecting Black man would be a Republican. Section 5 was a temporary provision. It's for a reason that no longer exists. The Supreme Court made clear in Shelby that today only certain conditions would justify any formula for Section 5 coverage, including blatantly discriminatory evasions of federal decrees, voting discrimination on a pervasive and rampant scale, and lack of minority office holders. I would ask senators who support this bill to cite one single instance of an invasion of a federal decree in a voting rights case. Just one. One of the most egregious situations that I've observed is when the city of Kinston, North Carolina, submitted a change for preclearance wherein they were no longer going to run on a party. They wanted to run nonpartisan. And this is an African American majority city. So the African Americans control, the city council who wanted to make that change. And the department objected to the change because it felt, and in its letter, it said basically that if there was no D next to the name of the candidates, then the African Americans would no longer get elected and they would not know who to vote for.
So I think that gives us a pretty good sense of kind of your positions on at least that one particular piece of legislation in the federal level, H.R. 4. Do you want to talk to us about that, why you felt so strongly about that, Maureen?
Well, sure. I can't even explain in a short time how devastating that is to go and work in a place where you really feel that if any particular section in the Department of Justice should be nonpartisan, it should be the voting section, because the amount of power that the section has, and especially had when I started there, because when I started there, they still had pre-clearance oversight of the traditionally southern states and other states that had later been added to Section 5. And essentially, these, myself included, we were making decisions regarding procedures that local jurisdictions wanted to implement in regards to their elections. But unless we gave the okay and permitted them to make those changes, they would not be made. And unfortunately, the powers that be that are in that section, and I might add, they're still the same people today. So they haven't changed. Some of them have been there for 35, 40, 45 years. And they are the ones that set the tone for the section. And it is highly political. And to say that I was shocked by how political it was an understatement. I think that they should focus on discrimination where it is, irrespective of who is discriminating, and they should use the tools that they have to prevent that from happening. And that's not what occurs.
So let me just push back on you a little bit, because many people feel that that decision, Shelby, from the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act and basically made it impossible for the Voting Rights Act to do its job, which was to really try to spot places where discrimination was taking place and prevent it. And do you want to address that? Because I think that is a very common sentiment about that Supreme Court decision.
Well, I think they're incorrect, and I'll say why. Section 5 was only one aspect of the Voting Rights Act. So there are still sections within the Voting Rights Act that the department has complete control over and has the power to enforce. Section 2 prevents any kind of intentional discrimination, as well as any kind of change in any type of election procedure that has the effect of discriminating against a minority based upon race or language. And so they still had the same power that they had all along with the Voting Rights Act. Section 5, however, the Supreme Court made clear, was always a temporary provision. So the entire Voting Rights Act doesn't have to be reauthorized. Section 5, however, did have to be reauthorized. And the reason for that is because it was always temporary, because it was designed specifically to root out cases within typically southern states who, although they had been told how to give the right to vote to minorities, were evading that through holding things like only white primaries and having literacy tests or having people pay in order to vote. And so that was the basis. They were totally disregarding the court's decisions, and they were evading these decrees by a court. And that's why it was temporary. And what the Supreme Court said in Shelby was, look, at the time that this was authorized, there was rampant discrimination throughout our nation. And that type of discrimination no longer exists. And the section still has the same powers that it always had to utilize Section 2, Section 3, Section 4, Section 208, and all of them are geared to protect voting rights. So Section 5 is no longer necessary, in my opinion.
Bennie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I've always heard it this way. It's quite eye-opening to hear that the other sections are rarely referenced, but they do have the same teeth that 5. Are you saying that Section 5, that's the extension, is basically to give more time to root out, and that one was set to expire? You could technically dissolve it once you root it out, and that's the reason why that section is different from the other sections. There's really no extension, because I've always thought that if the extension didn't happen, then a lot of people is going to lose rights, and I was one of them. So you're saying that's not the case? And
no, Section 5, when it was first, when it was authorized, only went for a certain period of time and had to be reauthorized. So it was reauthorized again in, I think it was in, don't hold me to this, I think it was in the 80s. And then again, it was reauthorized
every 25 years, right?
2006. But the people that reauthorized it are Congress. And so what's happened is they reauthorize it based upon a record that they gather through hearings. Many of the decisions and many of the cases that they utilized in basing their decision that Section 5 should be reauthorized are cases in which the Department of Justice said that they objected to a particular change moving forward and did not grant preclearance, and then were later found out to have been acted inappropriately in making their decision. So many of those faulty decisions were used to justify that extension. And I would add that the Department of Justice, specifically the voting section, has been sanctioned by federal courts to the tune of over $2 million for bad behavior in using Section 5.
So your position then is Section 5 should be allowed to roll away so that you can start using the correct provisions of the law. And if you just follow the correct provisions, then Section 5 really doesn't have that much weight, because you don't lose anything by taking that section out. It was temporary, and there shouldn't be any more of this rooting out, as you say,
right?
Because that was the intent in the first place. I got it.
Well, yeah,
I got to read about this, but I want to make sure I follow.
Well, essentially, the Voting Rights Act has several sections. They're all still in full force effect, except the Section 5.
Got it.
I want to just jump in because I don't want to. I want to make sure that we get to some other concerns that you have, in particular mail-in voting. But I do just want to say that I personally do not believe that we have, in fact, rooted out racism in the election landscape. And I think are still getting, for example, decisions like in North Carolina, where a court determined that a particular gerrymandering map was drawn with surgical precision to prevent Black people from having voting power. And I use that as one example. I know it might not be, something particular for the for the Voting Rights Act or for pre-clearance, but just that the attitudes that prevailed have not completely been eliminated. So I think that is still an ongoing concern. But
I don't disagree with you at all. But what I'm saying is we no longer have the type of discrimination that justified the type of power that was given for Section 5, which is why it was a temporary provision. And what you have to understand is the North Carolina or any of these other cases, those cases were brought under the Voting Rights Act under Section 2, not Section 5.
So
they still have the tools to root it out.
Okay, so we appreciate you making those points, and it's really helpful.
Hey, I got to go do my homework.
If there was, corruption and a lack of even-handedness in the Department of Justice, I think all of us would hope that if any place, as you said, the Department of Justice would try to be a place that was working in a balanced and nonpartisan environment. And it is disappointing to hear that that was not your experience. But I do want to move on because we just have a few minutes left. And I know that you had some other concerns. In particular, you had concerns about mail-in ballots. And we also had people who wrote in and told us some very disconcerting experiences about mail-in ballots. So I want to make sure that we get to those concerns. That was definitely when we had a conversation, one of the things that you seemed most concerned about in terms of some of the laws that are being, some of the election law changes that are happening. And you made the example in California that I believe they've switched to an all mail-in system there.
Yeah, I just don't think that the United States or any states here actually have the ability to move quickly from an in-person voting type of, election day voting or early voting to a full mail-in election. And that's for several reasons. But I think one of the biggest reasons, and one of the things that our organization really focuses on, is the fact that under federal law, states are required to do regular vetting of their voter rolls. And they're supposed to remove people who have moved. They're supposed to remove people who have died. They're supposed to remove, in certain states, people who have now become felons. And they don't do it well. And so what we do is we go and we examine their voter rolls, and we use our own database, and we will tell states when they have individuals on there that should not be on there. When you have a voter roll that's not up to date, and then you mail out ballots to everybody, whether or not they have requested it or not, it is a recipe for disenfranchising people who no longer live at those addresses. And it's also opens us wide open for instances of fraud. And, after the 2000 election, there was a bipartisan commission, we refer to it as the Carter-Baker Commission. And they looked at the things that happened in the United States during the 2000 election and how can we improve things. And, and one of the things they said is the one area of our election system that is most susceptible to fraud is in the mail-in ballot system. And so I think that we have to be very careful when we, when states make procedures for mail-in balloting. And I think the integrity of those ballots has to be protected.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to acknowledge that we have serious problems with the voter rolls. And as an example for this, so this is my cousin sent me this. This is it's a primary election day information. It's an application actually to fill out a ballot for his mother, Rita Wilimowski, who had been dead for, I think, over 10 years. He sent me her death certificate. This was in New York State. And so we do know that in many of the states that the voter rolls are very problematic. And I did also have an audience member write in about a very difficult experience that she had in California in 2008 when they actually looked at some of the problems that had existed. And this was Robin Gibson, and we're going to have her on a forum to talk about this. But she and people that volunteers that she was working with looked in detail in 2008 and found what they thought was very, very serious concerns about possible forgery of people's applications for the ballots, if I understood her correctly. Robin, if I see Robin is in the chat, if you want to Robin sent me a long email that I can't go into, but if you want to put a brief 1 or 2 sentence description of what you discovered, we can put that up. So do you want to, we're at the end of our time here, Maureen, but do you want to just sort of summarize kind of what your concerns are about how election laws may be being changed in a way that is tilting the playing field in one direction or the other, whether that's in terms of your work at the federal level or your current concerns now more at the state level?
Well, I think what you're seeing across the United States, in states that are changing their election procedures and they, passing what they're calling election integrity bills. I think what you're seeing is because many states are doing that because prior to the 2020 election, there were lawsuits all over the United States who were basing their lawsuits on the COVID pandemic. And what happened was you saw a tremendous loosening of state election laws that are designed to protect the integrity of the ballot. For example, drop boxes. Prior to the 2020 election, I'm not aware of any state that had drop boxes, okay? Many of those drop boxes were not even monitored by any type of video, et cetera, to see what was happening with the drop box, who was approaching the drop box, et cetera. You also had ballots were allowed to be received for days after, the election. You had signature matching. In many states, they sued about signature matching, saying that there was just no way that the average person could determine if a signature was the same as was on file. And so courts were suspending signature requirements. They were suspending witness requirements to someone to witness your mail-in ballot. And so I think what happened was there was such a loosening of every type of election integrity procedure that was in place. States are now going back to the drawing table and they're like, look, we're going to put these things back in place. We're going to make sure that we make it easy to vote, but hard to cheat.
So I think what we're seeing there is a bit of a push and pull. So you have,
yeah,
I think you've got the sides fighting it out. And I think our position here is that we don't think that any of these parties, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, are angels. In general, they're often trying to get an advantage in one direction or the other. But we certainly appreciate you coming on and pointing out what you thought were these inequities that you experienced at the Justice Department and some of the concerns that you have about these provisions. I do think that Colorado has had drop boxes. I'll have to check with Dwight Shellman, the county manager there, but Colorado's been an all-mail system for,
I was going to say they're an all-mail
years, and I'm pretty sure they've had drop boxes. I do think that they are well monitored. I'll check with him on the video on that. Whether
and it's one thing to have a drop box in front of the registrar's office too, as opposed to all over the city.
Yeah, and it's also very important to have them monitored. It's not that hard to set up a video camera around those drop boxes. So I think what we hope to see is more conversation, more dialogue about people's concerns and efforts to try to make these election laws as equitable as possible so that we have more confidence, that people aren't saying, well, the election was just slanted one way or the other. But again, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your viewpoints with us. And it's a pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so that's our forum. We just went a few minutes over. I will note that we had a lot of pushback in the chat about the pre-clearance and whether or not it was needed. And that's in the Voting Rights Act. What people in the chat are really emphasizing is that the Section 5 was pre-clearance. So I will put that up. Not the same teeth, only Section 5 had the pre-clearance provisions. And what that means is that provision was preventative. It could prevent the discrimination from taking place as opposed to coming in afterwards and trying to somehow rectify that situation. So I think it's really important to look at these from all sides. Elections are not meaningful unless they're fair. What do you think, Bennie?
Yep, they're not meaningful unless there's evidence.
Right, evidence.
Yeah, I don't need no confidence. I need some. I write code. I need some evidence.
We want them to be fair, and we want there to be evidence that they
Yeah.
were fair. And then I just do want to let you know, if you want to get in touch with us, the best thing to do is to go to our website. That is smartelections.us. And wow, my banners are all over the place. Smartelections.us. And if you want to reach us, you can reach us at contact@smartelections.us. And we hope that you will reach us. If you enjoyed the forum, if you found it interesting, provocative, if you learned something, please go ahead and put that into the comments. We do really, really appreciate getting those positive comments about your experience. It does help us let other people know about what a great opportunity, what a great resource we have here. You can also email us comments that you have, either positive or concerns, improvements that you want, at contact@smartelections.us. And if you are motivated, we hope that you will make a donation. We do rely on your donations in order to do the work. And the easiest way is to go to that website, smartelections.us, and just click on donate. And I will also put that information into the chat, where you can, if there's a website that you can go directly to. But easiest is smartelections.us, and just click on donate. And you can also, whether you donate or not, you can get the word out about us. You're our PR machine. So go ahead and give us some love on social media. We are on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok. So when you see our posts, please do share them. Please do forward our emails to your friends and family and networks, and let them know that this is a wonderful resource for them. And coming up, February 8th, which is our next forum, you can go ahead and sign up for it. That is going to be our election protection reboot. And we are going to be having the information that we're presenting in a new, more easily accessible format, with more visuals and special sections like quizzes to make it more fun, a very organized curriculum to try to present the information in a way that is easy to absorb. We hope that you're going to be sharing that with groups that you're a part of and asking them to co-sponsor. And we're going to have some special segments. One, the name we got for it right now, how about this? Inside Bennie's Brain.
We did not talk about that.
Okay, all we're saying, we're going to have a special segment where
Y'all saw
Bennie
it
is,
at the same time as me.
Bennie is going to, no, I totally told you beforehand. Bennie is going to have a special segment where he shares some of the ideas that he's been thinking about, or things that he thinks that we need to know. And if you have ideas about what to name that segment, that's what I called it so far, Inside Bennie's Brain. But you can email us or put those in your chat, in the chat, your ideas for what to call that segment. We're going to have, like I said, quizzes and more visuals. And that is the forum that we have for you today. And remember, this is what democracy looks like.
Good night, everybody.
See you soon.